I think one of the major realities is that you can't get to to the highest levels without technical ability. You need a lot of a solid technical foundation. In England, it's more the athlete these days. First the athlete, then the footballer. But countries like Spain and Japan, they've maintained their tradition. The technical skills is your passport to the highest levels.
Welcome to the CoachCraft podcast, where we explore the art of coaching youth sports through conversations with exceptional coaches. In each episode, we unearth the philosophies, the experiences, the stories, and insights of coaches who are making a difference in their communities and beyond. I'm your host, Alf Gracombe, and I hope CoachCraft will inspire you to learn from these coaches and improve your craft as a coach and a youth sports leader. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the show. Today we're joined by Biso Nkosi, a coach with over 20 years of experience in sport development across multiple continents, beginning in his native South Africa to where he currently works in Japan. Biso holds a BA in sports science and an honors degree in human movement studies from the University of Pretoria in South Africa. His football credentials include coaching certifications from the Confederation of African Football, Coerver Coaching, and the KNVB, the Royal Dutch Football Association. Beyond coaching, Biso has worked as a physical education teacher, a sport for development consultant with UNICEF South Africa, and was head of youth development at the Kaela Boys Football Club for 7 years. His global perspective is informed by his experiences studying youth development methodologies in Brazil, Spain, the Netherlands, Japan, and his native South Africa. Biso brings a unique cross-cultural lens to coaching philosophy and youth development that I'm excited to explore with him today. Enjoy. Biso Nkosi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Alf. Thank you very much for inviting me. Looking forward to the podcast.
Great. It's so great to have you here. And we should let our listeners know here that we are on opposite sides of the world, pretty much. You're in Japan. I'm here in the United States. So it's late afternoon, evening time for me. It's very early in the morning for you. So I really appreciate you getting up early to have this conversation with me today.
No problem. No problem at all. Welcome, listeners.
And so, Biso, we're going to get into this. Part of what is so fascinating to me about your journey through football is your international orientation. You're originally from South Africa. You're living and working in Japan now. We're going to get to that. We're going to connect the dots from where it began and how you got to where you are today. But if you can, maybe take us back to your childhood and growing up and how you came to football, and talk a little bit about just what the youth sports and specifically youth soccer football environment was like where you grew up.
Okay, so I grew up in a place called Mamelodi in South Africa, and I'm a first generation born free. So I was born pretty much in and around the time when there was a transition in South African government from apartheid policies to new age. Um, so I went to a school called Brooklyn Montessori, and I started playing football on the dusty streets of Mamelodi in the township. So we played a lot of 1v1, 2v2, 3v3 games with a lot of my friends in the township. Township is also another word for favela, if you would refer to it as that. At Brooklyn Montessori, when I was 5 years old, I then met Donovan Bosman, who is still today is my best friend. And I was fortunate enough because Donovan Bosman's father was linked with football, and he provided my first early exposures of playing football at club level. He was involved with a club called Berea Park, and we played football at Berea Park from when I was 6 years old. And the coaching wasn't the best in the world because it was still early days of coaching, but it gave us an opportunity to go to play league games, on a small-sided field. It was literally on half a field, small-sided games. We would of 7v7. We would go to different tournaments like Riverside Sun, and provincial tournaments, and that's my early exposure of football.
And so you said when you were 6, you began
Yes, yes, yes,
playing
yes.
organized football.
Organized, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so prior to that, what do you remember playing? Like, you mentioned you were sort of playing, was it like out in the streets or were there fields
Yes,
that you
yes,
could
yes.
play
So,
on? Yeah.
so my first exposure to football was through my dad. He loved watching a soccer team called Morocco Swallows. So he took me to soccer games and he put me on his shoulders to watch the game when I was 4 or 5 years old. But when I was 5, 6, I started playing some soccer on the streets informally with my friends, and that was the first time I got in touch and in contact with the ball, you know. So it was
And
on the dusty streets.
and so and then when you started playing organized, was it through a school or a club? I
It's
think
a
you
studio club.
mentioned
It's a studio club. It's a
through a
studio club.
club. Okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
is that kind of the setup for organized youth football in South Africa at the time? Was primarily through clubs? Was there
Yes, yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. It was
And so there
primarily
was no organized football through schools or
there was
okay.
also through the school program. So later on, after Brooklyn Montessori, because Brooklyn Montessori was a preschool, we then went to Leonard Ridge Primary, and at Leonard Ridge Primary from grade 1 till grade 3, we started playing mini soccer. So on a Saturday, mini soccer games. But because we were already involved with club soccer at that age, with Pee Wee soccer, we were playing club soccer instead of the school soccer. But there was a school soccer also element at that age group.
Gotcha. So talk a little bit if you can about the coaching. So you mentioned you didn't feel the coaching was particularly advanced.
Yes.
And maybe if you could just place us kind of in a what year are we talking about here,
Okay,
roughly?
so this is pretty much in 1992,
Okay.
1993, um, you know, and the coaching wasn't the great, it was we were in a straight line, and then would pass the ball to the coach, he'd lay it off, and then it would shoot, unopposed, no game situation. Um, the matches we played against is 7 versus 7 on half a field at under 9, under 8, under 6. You know, so it was a lot of like beehive football. A lot
Hmm.
of there wasn't organized drills like the Coerver methodology that we find today of ball mastery skills. There wasn't a focus on mastering the ball before mastering shooting or passing elements. So that was pretty much the focus of the coaching then, you know?
Well, at
Yeah,
least you were playing seven aside. It was,
yes.
because when I started playing as a 7-year-old around the same age as you, they threw us onto an 11v11 field.
Wow.
So at
Wow.
least you were playing a smaller version of the
On
game
Saturday
at
game.
those
Yeah.
younger
Yeah.
ages. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in terms of the technical training, the ball mastery skills, there really wasn't any
No, there wasn't
part of that.
anything that
Yeah.
was available. Look, my Neil was a voluntary coach, fantastic administrator, the late Neil Bosman, fantastic football administrator. He'd go on to become the president of the University of Football Academy program. But I think the general knowledge of football coaching was very limited in his time.
So you're now in a career, you're an educator, you're a coach. At what point did this idea that you might want to coach or teach young people, when did that factor into your thinking, into your life?
You know, Alf, I've been fortunate that I've had football my whole life. From a young age playing. I then went on to France in '98 with the school team. Neil Bosman organized a tour to France for the FIFA World Cup. So we shadowed Bafana Bafana at the France World Cup, and one of
So you
the
were
things.
traveling with a group of other students to the
Yeah, with,
98
with our
World Cup.
school team,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Wow,
we,
what
we
an
did
opportunity.
fundraising for 2 years from 1996. After South Africa won the African Cup of Nations in 1996, Neil said, look, with Peter Sothakis, they said, look, we're going to organize a trip to the World Cup to go see Bafana Bafana. And it was unprecedented at that time, fundraising to go to an international tournament for South Africans. So we got a chance to watch Bafana Bafana training and in the qualifiers before the World Cup. And then we went to go watch them in France. And we also went to play in the Paris Cup. So we watched them in Marseille against France when we lost 3-0, where Zidane was amazing. We watched them against Saudi Arabia. We also watched them against Denmark. So I got a chance to see the Laudrup brothers in a competitive game also. And then the final game we watched was England and Tunisia. So we got a chance to see Beckham, Scholes, Gary Neville, and the boys playing, you know? But post that, it was just always just that involvement and being around football, starting with my father and the influence from my father with Morocco Swallows, then with Neil Bosman, and playing all the way through high school. And in grade 10, I just said, you know what? I want to coach and give young people an opportunity to uh, receive good coaching, a type of coaching that I didn't get when I was young.
All right, so we'll come back to the coaching. I know I just asked you a question, but you mentioned the World Cup. You mentioned traveling to France. Was this really like your first exposure to kind of world football, to
Yes,
watching international games?
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
And how
yeah.
old were you at the time?
I was 12 years old. 12 years
12
old.
years old.
Yeah.
Unbelievable experience. Yeah.
It was an incredible experience. Till this day, I relive the memory and every World Cup I always share photos on Facebook with all the guys that we went on tour with and to the rest of the world, you know, be like, you know, I've been to 2 World Cups and really
Yeah.
bragging about it.
Well, so okay, so fast forward 12 years from that World Cup, and
Yeah.
well, you can maybe see the poster on my wall here if you're watching the video. For the folks just tuning into the audio, you won't see this, but behind me on the wall, I keep this poster, and it's a poster of the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. Uh, we've talked a little bit, and I know that you love Spanish football as I do. So that was the
Yeah.
year Spain won, but it was the first World Cup to be hosted in on the African continent. So, and South Africa was the host of this tournament. So, talk about that a little bit. I mean, this was just the milestone event for world football, of course, but just curious, like on the ground in South Africa, what was that like in the build up
Oh,
to this tournament and then
it
hosting
was.
this?
It was absolutely incredible, Alf. I'll actually start because it was twofold. Because the one experience was watching the games, and the other experience was volunteering as an accreditation volunteer. So I volunteered firstly for the 2009 Confederations Cup, and I was stationed at Loftus and Loftus Stadium in Pretoria. And I was doing the accreditation card for all the media personnel, the press people, um, you know, the support staff of the various national teams that were qualified for the tournament. And I met one or two American reporters and we ended up covering a story with them regarding where Argentina was going to be based. So Argentina
Mm.
was going to be based at the High Performance Center, which is a university I studied at the University of Pretoria for the duration of the tournament of the FIFA World Cup. So
Wow.
fast forward to the World Cup itself, we got a chance to see Argentina training uh, at the High Performance Center. I got a chance to watch 8 games over and above me working as a volunteer. I watched Spain versus Chile, Spain versus Paraguay, uh, and even the World Cup final itself, because my sister was an executive at MTN, and MTN was telecommunications local sponsor of the FIFA World Cup. So yeah, it's incredible memories. It's memories that live in my heart. You know, the cell phones at that time weren't like the iPhones that we had now.
Mm-mm.
You know, it was a BlackBerry, so that the picture resolutions weren't the best in the world. But I've got one or two photos of matches where it's a high resolution camera, and that are saved with me for a very long time.
Yeah, amazing. Say what you want about FIFA and the organization and everything that comes along with it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. There is nothing quite like a World Cup.
Nothing,
And
nothing.
when it came to the US in 94, I got to see Spain actually play Switzerland in an elimination round game in Washington, D.C. Just yeah, unbelievable memories, and that was a big deal for the U.S. of course at the time as well. So just hosting the World Cup for the first time. And so, what did you see in South African football culture, or just the nation more broadly, kind of after the World Cup came and went? Did you see any lingering effects, either positive or negative, from hosting the tournament?
Look, we to be honest, I think we lost a little bit of an edge. We had so much preparation that we did in South Africa. We got eliminated in the first round, which was unfortunate. It was the first host country to ever get eliminated in the first round of a FIFA World Cup tournament. But it also told us about the shortcomings of the South African game, like lack of proper development structures in the country. You know,
Hmm.
in the South African league, there's only a handful of clubs professionally, which I can count with one hand, that have actual development programs from the age of 6. So a lot of the development programs are starting at academies are starting at under 14. This is mainly due because of the safety of young people and bringing them younger than the age of 14 with maturity into an academy setup, nationally
Hmm.
or at a club level. So a lot of the clubs only start having their academies at 14 years old. And what is actually taking place between the ages of 6 till 12 with a lot of these players in development programs. And that is showing our shortcomings. And we had a lot of funds that we got from the legacy funds from the World Cup, but questions have been asked: what happened to the legacy funds? They were supposed to last South Africa for many, many years after the World Cup, and now that these funds have been depleted. You know.
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah, and I think that's maybe a good mm, chance here to just pivot back to coaching, because you just had an observation there about youth development and the lack of infrastructure and opportunity for structured football development for kids at the younger ages because they're starting these academies late, it sounds like.
Right. Right.
So as you started to think about coaching and teaching, maybe if you could talk a little bit about your journey into coaching and then a little bit more of these observations that you are seeing as you start coaching yourself and then these different age groups and how they're developing or not, as the case may be, in South Africa.
Right. So in South Africa, my journey of coaching began when I enrolled at the University of Pretoria for the sports science program. And University of Pretoria, I'd say, is within the top 3 universities in South Africa for studying sports science. So the program started in 2002, and already in 2003, in my matric year, which is my final year of school, I was preparing myself with getting the required grades to coach. The beauty about the sports science program is that it was designed for athletes. So in the morning would have classes till about 12:30 or latest till 2 o'clock, in a wide variety of modules, and then in the afternoon would do practical hours in our specialized sporting code. So I would get involved with the youth development program at the University of Pretoria. And the University of Pretoria was one of the few programs, because they also had a professional club. It was one of the few programs in South Africa that had a program from under 6 till under 19s in terms of the juniors. And then it will have the senior programs. So we had plus minus 23 teams within the University of Pretoria. The University of Pretoria was fortunate because at the university there's about 9 to 12 soccer fields. It's actually beautiful to see the fields at the university that are designated for soccer. You know,
Mm.
um, so I got in-service training and experiential training and learning within the University of Pretoria's soccer facility, and I worked at the university for 7 years, coaching various age groups from under 11, under 15s, under 17s, and yeah, so we had a very good program. It was led by a man called Mr. Steve Barker and Juan Marquez, a Spaniard, who taught me about a lot about the game from a young age.
And so you just mentioned these two gentlemen sort of serving in a sort of mentor role, it sounds like, for
Right.
you. How else were you educating yourself about coaching football? It's one thing to play. You played a lot of football
Yes.
as a kid, but now coaching. Yeah, how did you go about educating yourself as a coach?
I would follow a lot of with Juan, especially as a Spaniard, he brought a lot of Spanish influence into the youth development program. He showed me discipline and respecting time. But I would watch a lot of videos, especially later on with the Coerver methodology. I would follow that methodology quite a bit. Steve Barker had just come back from the UK with the UEFA A license. So what we would do is would have every 5 or 6 weeks would have coach development and coach enrichment sessions where he would prepare sessions on various themes, and he would have FA coaching methodology articles that we would read, and the coaches would gather around and go through and have coach development sessions during the course of our time there.
So you were still at this point, still in South Africa, but your lens had widened quite a bit in terms of these coaching practices and frameworks and just people who were working in South Africa coming from Europe. At what point did you start to get interested or think about going abroad to further your own education and experience in football?
So what happened is in South Africa we've got what we call is an honors degree. So that's it's a pre-master's program. So you'll do your undergrad degree for 3 years, then you'll do honors for a year. In my honors degree, I got an opportunity to work at a school called Courtney House. They were doing the Cambridge education system, and I was following that system and I was working there, and that was really awesome. It was a great experience teaching an international syllabus, focusing on anatomy and physiology, contemporary studies in sports, and motor skill and skill acquisition. And what we did at Cambridge is that it taught me a lot about video editing and um, analyzing a wide variety of sports. But I got an opportunity to go to Spain in 2014, and that exposed me to more coaching programs. And at that time, whilst I was still working at the international school, I had become the technical director of my own program called Kaela Football Club, where we had over 100 kids in the program from under 9 till under 19s. And that really planted the seed of, um, you know, getting a coaching philosophy, a coaching methodology, a coaching framework, and a blueprint of how we would do things.
So you spent time, Spain was the first place you did some work in football there.
Right.
And where else did you travel from there and spend some time?
So I spent time in Spain, and then I did a master's degree program with the University of Johannesburg and the University of Utrecht and the University of Scuba in Netherlands and Japan, respectively. So I spent a study abroad program, a month in the Netherlands, and I also spent a month in Japan.
So you've seen football and youth development now across a few different countries, and you're working in Japan, and we'll get to how you got there in just a second. But um, talk a little bit, if you can, about seeing kids across these different cultures. They're all playing the same game, but you're seeing different. I imagine you're seeing a lot of differences in terms of how
Oh,
kids are showing up, how these programs are structured, and I imagine you're seeing some similarities. So maybe if you can speak to both of those, what do you see, working in Africa, working in Europe, working in Asia? Talk a little bit about some of those differences in development of young players.
so I think the biggest problem about the African diaspora is that a lot of the kids enter organized football too late.
Too late. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Just
Um,
because the opportunities, the infrastructure, the systems
yeah,
are just
yeah.
not available.
The infrastructure is not available. There's an element of safety. Do you leave your kid at 8? You know, and that's where the serious ball mastery work needs to be happening at 6, 7, 8 years old. The ball mastery skills, developing
Hmm.
two-footed players, and that's where I see the competitive advantage of Japan and countries like Spain already takes place. In Spain, you've got little canteras or little centers where kids can do extramurals at 4, 5 years old, and they're getting that early exposure to football, or they do football starts at home. And that's the same scenario as Japan. In Japan, I see futsal arenas, I see indoor facilities where kids as young as 6 years old are doing badminton. They're starting with elementary school basketball. In the school system, they're getting exposed to these um, facilities and opportunities. In South Africa, there's 26,000 schools. Only a fraction of the 26,000 schools have sports facilities. It's a third of the schools in South Africa have sports facilities. So, a kid grows up being physically illiterate, for a lack of a better word.
Hmm.
Whereas in countries like Brazil, they get exposed to futsal at a young age, compressed space, compressed environment, and there's early exposure to football, and the governments of those countries take these sports very seriously, which is something that needs to be worked on in the African spectrum.
Hmm. Hmm. Interesting. Well, so if you can maybe step back, and where you currently are, I'd love to hear a little bit of the story of how you got to this opportunity in Japan, and even specifically, what is the environment there? Where are you working, and what are you doing exactly?
Okay, so how the Japan environment actually took place is we're doing a study abroad program in the Global Masters program where we had students from Netherlands and Japan and South Africa. There was 11 of us, and we were doing our final presentations at the University of Scuba. And our assignment was on the ASICS program, and how ASICS can be used as a sports for development program at two local schools. So we're giving them a presentation about the research we've done, and they'd invited the people from the Netherlands embassy in in Tokyo, and also the South African embassy to come and listen to our presentations. And one of the gentlemen in our presentations was Mr. Kuzayo, and he invited me back to Tokyo to the embassy to just have a chat. And he asked me, how do I find this country? How do I find Japan? And I told him it's safe, it's really nice. And then he told me that there's a program called the JET program where you can teach English for up to 5 years, you know? So that was like, I left the embassy, and it kind of lingered in the back of my mind. And I was like, I need to finish my master's. And then in my final week of Japan, as I was about to board the train at Ueno Station, a South African walked past when I was speaking to the lady, and he said to me, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "No, I'm doing a master's program." And I asked him what he's doing. He's like, "No, he teaches English on the JET program." I'm like, "I've just heard about that program." He's like, "Wow, well, it's the easiest work you'll ever do. It's really competitive to get into, but it's
Yeah.
really nice, and it's the easiest work you'll ever do." And I went back to South Africa, did some research about the JET program. Actually, interestingly enough, there's actually three programs in the JET program. There's Council for International Relations, which is more like a diplomatic role, and you need to be able to be fluent in Japanese. So a lot of the Americans, the people from the UK, Scotland, France do a CAR program. Then there's a Sports Exchange Advisors program where you can teach sports in Japan for up to 5 years. And then there's the Assistant Language Teachers, which is a program that I'm on. Unfortunately, South Africa doesn't have a bilateral agreement with Japan for the sports exchange advisors, so I can't teach as a sports coach, which is something I'd have loved to do in Japan on the JET program.
Great. So, Biso, you're working in Japan now, and you've experienced these cultures, and you've experienced and seen and taken in a lot of influences from, the
Yeah.
Netherlands, from Spain, Brazil, Japan. Um, let's talk about your own personal coaching philosophy and values. How would you describe your coaching philosophy after experiencing so many different approaches? Clearly, these have informed how you think about the game, but where are you and how do you describe your own coaching approach and philosophy?
I would say that I'm a coach that believes in a team that plays a lot of ball possession football, that makes calculated entries into the opposition's final third, who are patient on the ball. We try and retain possession, try and maintain ball circulation. I'm also a fan of playing, it's part of my whole coaching philosophy, 4-2-3-1 as a formation, because it creates a lot of triangles on the field whenever any player is in possession of the ball. So that's the kind of game that I like to play. I like to play with wingers that can express themselves, that inverted wingers. So the left wing is on the right side of the field, and the right wing is on the left side of the field, that look to cut in, that look to dribble, that look to have creativity and improvisation. So that's the kind of philosophy I like to play with all the teams that I work with whenever I get an opportunity to coach.
Spoken like somebody who's clearly studied the Dutch and the Spanish traditions, the total football or the possession-based Guardiola
Yes,
approach, just to
yes,
use some of
Guardiola
the
approach.
shorthand.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, but you've also seen, you look at Brazil, you've watched, Messi play these like the idea of these sort of creative players and these very systems oriented structures, and maybe people see that a little bit at odds, but when you're again working with youth, working with young players, how do you talk to them about, okay, these structures, these formations, the style of play, but also individual expression? Is there room for that in your coaching?
yes. I think with when I was a technical director of Kaela Football Club, we would have 11 themes that we would cover throughout the year, and we'd do ball orientated conditioning, playing through the thirds, technical circle, wall pass, pressing. One of the themes was dribbling, so we would have dribbling for 3 weeks in a season, and we'd train 3 times a week, and we'd have variety, and but we would actually practice the skill of dribbling like we would have in the Coerver methodology. But one of the key elements I would try and teach the players is the when and how. You know, you don't want to be dribbling out from the back with your team. You want to be dribbling further on up the field, and you need to look at the moments to have individual creativity, because if you restrict that, you might be taking away the one element of a player's game that can take him to professional football if he's got the ability to do that. So it's important, sometimes growing up, especially in my early years of coaching, the parents would shout on the field, pass, pass, pass. Whereas, I'd be quiet or allow the player to express themselves. If they lose possession of the ball, it's okay. But over 4 or 5 years, if he keeps practicing that skill acquisition and building the neural pathways, he will learn how to do it effectively with pressure, because in the engrams, in the mind's eye, he's seen those situations so many times, and he has mastered that skill.
So, if you can, let's look at Japan specifically. That's where you are now. Um, Culturally speaking, I think it's safe to say Japan is maybe it's different, let's say, than say Brazil, right? Where I'm sure a
Right.
little bit more personal expression, flair
Mm.
is valued. These are, of course, cultural stereotypes, but I think you see them show up in the games. Japan, you see as a bit more, or it's, I guess, thought of as a bit more of a disciplined, maybe structured type of learning environment. I've never been to Japan. I'm just presuming a bit here, so tell me if I'm wrong. But do you see kids less, like maybe more risk averse in how they play in Japan, or do you have to encourage them more for individual expression?
Look, I think what has happened in the last couple of years, and I'll go back to Brazil. Brazil, because of the favelas and because of the kids are learning in the futsal environment. Futsal is a big component of Brazilian football. So
Hmm.
a lot of the skills they're learning through trial and error on the futsal pitch. So it's a game sense based training, without, especially at 6 till 15, without adult supervision. So through trial and error, they try to do the skills and they master them. For example, in Japan, it's more, they've gotten the influence of the Brazilians. Zico came to Japan in 1993 when the J League was started. He came and coached the Kashima Antlers, and over the last 30 years, Japan has gotten influence from the Spanish. It's got an influence from the Dutch mainly. There's a lot of partnerships within Spain and Japan where kids go to Spain for a couple of months to go play in different tournaments, and they've 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 already adopted the game based possession game stats from
Hmm.
the Spanish country. I would say that Japan, it's more you learn how to dribble. You learn how to do ball mastery. You get taught, from a young age. So I wouldn't say it's not more natural and not as creative, but they are taught these specific skills from a young age. And that's really where the differences emerge. Um, uh, in Brazil, it's more pleasure and participation. In Japan, it's more power and performance in terms of how you get learned or how you get taught how to do
Hmm.
these skills.
Interesting. Um, and so if you look at Japan and their national team, both the men's and the women's side, and of course the women won a World Cup, so
Right.
they've reached the highest level, at least at that in that moment. The men, not as much, and in some ways, a little bit like the US, kind of still developing and trying to catch up with the larger, European, South American clubs. But how would you characterize the Japanese style of play at the highest levels with the national
At the
team there?
highest levels,
Yeah.
it depends on the opposition that they play. For example, when Japan play in the Asian qualifiers, it's ball circulation, ball possession. And then when they get in the final thirds of the pitch, in the wide areas, Kubo, Mitoma, they will hurt you. They will hurt opposition defenses with a 1v1 ability to eliminate opposition, to create space, to penetrate into the opposition areas. So it's a lot of possession based football.
Because they have more of the ball, they're able
Yes,
to
yeah, they have
dominate
another
time on the
ball.
ball more. Yeah.
Yes, more of the time on the ball, but it's quick ball circulation. I mean, the Japanese, there's not much difference between the physiological structures of the Japanese and the South Africans. So it's a lot of short players. So speed of execution is very important in the game environment from them. So ball circulation is very quick. The dribbling is very quick. And in Asia, they've mastered that game model. And then when they're playing against the European countries like Spain, where they know that they're not going to get as much of the ball, when they do retrieve the ball, it's quick transitions. Try get it to the wide players further on up the pitch. Try get it to the striker as quick as possible on the ground, preferably, and then we support and combine in the final third very quickly. So it's a different mentality. It's absorb pressure, absorb pressure, absorb pressure, and then it's a quick fast breaks.
Yeah, and famously they beat Spain in the
They beat
World
Spain.
Cup.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so that
And
that
Germany also,
yeah, that was quite
and
a run they
yeah.
had.
So that I think beating Spain and Germany in the FIFA World Cup, that has given them the emotional and the psychological edge to say, okay, now we don't fear anyone. We can play any country in the world.
Hmm.
And going into future World Cups, Japan has got 100-year plan to win the FIFA World Cup. So it's very disciplined, very structured. They're not far away. Maybe 25 years time, they
Hmm.
they might win a FIFA World Cup.
Yeah, we keep in the United States, it's frustrating to be an American on the world football stage because we always talk about, oh, we're 10 years away from winning a World
Right.
Cup. We're always 10 years away from winning a World Cup. And if we're honest with ourselves, I think Japan is doing something that the US is not doing. They, I think, are legitimately building a style of play, and they have the discipline and the ability to play with it. Sure, they're going to make adjustments game to game depending on who they're
Right.
playing, as you mentioned. But when I look at the US, I don't see the same thing happening as I see in Japan.
Got you.
So if you ask me today, who's going to win the World Cup first? I mean, I'm not sure if either one will, at least in my lifetime. But
Right.
you have to say Japan maybe has a better shot at it. Um, so, looking at the world is getting smaller, right? People are able to travel more, communication, of course. I'm able to watch European matches. Just before we got on this podcast, I'm watching a La Liga match between Barcelona and Osasuna. I was delighted to see you show up on screen with your Barcelona shirt as
Oh,
well.
thank you.
Um, so, people are all over the world now are seeing the same players at the highest level. And so, um, if you kind of look at youth development and the youth game and where it's headed globally speaking, and maybe one can't make a claim so much about one global trend, but you've seen it now from a few different angles in different countries. What are some of the emerging trends that you see in youth sports development or youth football specifically? Um,
I think one of the major realities is that you can't get to the highest levels without technical ability. You need a lot of a solid technical foundation. In England, it's more the athlete these days. First the athlete, then the footballer. But countries like Spain and Japan, they've maintained their tradition. The technical skills is your passport to the highest levels. And technical skills involves being able to move the ball mastery, you know, being able to eliminate opposition in 1v1 situation, being able to switch the ball. If you can't drive the ball like Tony Cruz, different methodologies of different countries, but if you can't drive the ball like Tony Cruz, reaching that high level, or Paul Scholes reaching that high level as a central midfield player is not possible. If you can't, if you're not comfortable on the ball like Yui Hasegawa, if you're not scanning, so these are all technical components, and when you talk about scanning, we're talking about visual processing. So if you can't do these skills, the chances of you reaching the highest level are minimal. So, one of the key features that are emerging in youth football, or in senior football, is it's the street player. It's the player that can improvise. The Messis of this world. They're few and far between, but we need to encourage these players instead of saying no, don't dribble. So, in leading
well,
nations.
Mitoma is a great example, right?
Yes,
On the
Mutombo,
men's
yes.
side in
Yes,
in
yes, yes, yes.
Japan.
He actually went to Scuba University, which is the university I went to go visit. He went to go study dribbling as his thesis for his undergraduate
Yeah,
degree.
I've heard that. So his thesis, he has a thesis on dribbling. That's
Yeah, on dribbling, yeah.
uh,
So
fantastic.
so yeah, we have to encourage those creative players. We have to train it. Lamal, his program at Barcelona. Twice a week, he's individualized, specialized training where he focuses on dribbling and penetration and skill and that type of skill. So it's not it's natural. Yes, for some players it's natural and it's in it, and they've got that ability from a young age, like Ronaldinho. But for some players, we need to train it, and the more they train it, the better off these players are going to be. So the creative dribbler is an emerging theme with youth football.
And I agree with you. I think that, we've been through an era of, what I'd call systems football, probably most embodied by Guardiola, but he's certainly not the only one.
Mm.
But these systems, they become um, almost less reliant on the creative players. Not to say these players aren't technically amazing or that they can't, pull off working in these systems and do it with beauty and creativity. But it seems like the systems have really been the trend over the last, I don't know, let's just say 20 years or so.
Right, right, right.
Are we now on the brink of an era where the dribbler will be coming back, that player that can, provide the unpredictable moment, can break through the lines with the ball
I
instead
I
of,
think so. I
uh,
think so because
yeah.
when you're playing against stubborn defenses like a team like Italy, you know, for example, Spain also they over the last couple of years they won the World Cup with Iniesta and Xavi, and you know, um, Iniesta could penetrate from the eighth position. But over the last couple of years, they've struggled against teams that play, especially the low block. And what we saw at the Euros um, is that Spain now have got the street players. So if they're playing against a team and for some reason this team is having a low block and they're struggling to penetrate through the middle, through the side, or over on top, now they've got Lamal and Nico Williams to eliminate that zonal marking defense systems that ensures that they can penetrate going forward. So I think it's coming back, and teams are really investing, especially in South America, to find Vinicius Junior, or
Hmm. Hmm.
as Angelotti will say, when Vinny's got the ball, I don't tell him go left, go right, pass. Let him do what he feels is right at that moment, for the benefit of the team.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think even if you just look at Barcelona, maybe they're often, the kind of bellwether for Spanish football. You mentioned Lamine Yamal. Barcelona has Rafinha, the Brazilian, on the left
Yes,
side.
yes,
Like these
yes,
are attacking, creative. They want the ball at their feet. They're gonna. And Barcelona plays very differently now than they did, uh, under Guardiola, as an example.
yes,
And I would
yes,
I
yes.
would say they're really fun to watch right now.
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
I fully agree with you.
Fantastic. So, all right, well, let's come back. I want to just ground us now in a little bit of the questions around or thoughts around coaching youth again, and specifically the grassroots. And so, here in the United States, our grassroots football are typically these community programs are often volunteer run. So
Right,
we've got coaches who are coming to the game. Maybe they've played some soccer, they've got some experience coaching, but there are oftentimes, parents who just want to help out the program and get on the
right,
field and help these kids have a good experience. Um, so there's that. And then, I live in the city of Boston. It's a diverse city. You've got, I think it's 20 over 20% of people who live in the city of Boston are foreign born.
okay.
So it's a very diverse city, a diverse environment. My local program reflects that in many ways, both racially, socioeconomically. You yourself, you mentioned being born post-apartheid South Africa. So um, you came into, obviously, you learned the history there, but you're coming into a more multiracial environment, and you're playing with and friends with more, white kids,
Mm.
um, and then you're coaching in these environments. So these are diverse. Well, I imagine, you tell me, I'm
Right,
projecting a
that's
bit,
what I
but
meant.
was the football environment, the youth football environment, was it a diverse one in South
Yeah,
Africa for
yeah.
yourself?
In my program at Kaela, we had over 100 kids from various socioeconomic backgrounds. And what we did was a part of the integration was we ensured that everyone comes from with training kits. So we 30% of the program were kids from less socioeconomic backgrounds, kids that didn't pay, but we knew that they could give us a competitive edge on the field of play whenever we were playing against the opposition. So what we did was we got a training kit that standardized everyone. So, so that Tom doesn't come with a brand new Manchester United shirt and then Jerry comes with a shirt that's got holes in it. We eliminated the socioeconomies in terms of that regard. And
Yep.
we ensured that everyone spoke English so that also the kids from the township who didn't know how to speak the language, English, got an opportunity to learn how to express themselves in a medium of instruction of English.
So as a coach, um, how do you think about coaching diverse populations? I mean, on one level, you have to recognize that people are coming from different places. They're showing up at the
Yes.
field coming from different places. And one of the beautiful things about sport, about football, is that there's a common language that's spoken on the field,
Right.
and it's at its best, right? These differences they sort of fade into the background. It's not the thing that people are thinking about when they're making a pass to their teammate, regardless of where they're coming from and where you're coming from. But as a coach, what are some tools or ways of sort of approaching coaching kids coming from these different backgrounds? What's some advice or some recommendations that you might have?
So one of the recommendations I would give to an aspiring or up and coming coach is to create themes that you want to cover throughout the year. That will avoid running monotonous sessions.
Mhm.
So if you have 10 themes, as I mentioned before, building up from the back, playing through the lines, pressing, and all of these themes need to have small-sided games related switch of play. And if you do themes for 3 times a week or 3 weeks and then change themes every 3 weeks, you're covering a wide spectrum of a young player's development component, you know. So you'll realize, okay, this player is lacking in this area. They need this support. I would also suggest having a report, a player report. And in the player report, it's really simple. It's the player's name. At the bottom, it can be final remarks, and it can be four squares: technical, tactical, physical, social. And you write in the one column challenges, in the other column strengths, and you can have these technical reports quarterly. So every 12 weeks in the season, or every 8 weeks if you want, write technical reports. So it will give a coach an idea of what is happening with the player at an individual level. Furthermore, what I'd also do is I would, within the themes, you get an idea where players are lacking, where they need more time. Um, do ball mastery exercises, possession games. I'm a big fan of possession games, 4v2 rondos, 5v5 possession games, because that provides a technical foundation for passing and
Mhm.
receiving exercises in game situation, and also
So
small-sided games.
yeah, and I'm with you 100% on that approach. And of course, you mentioned the technical ball mastery piece
Oh,
to complement the small-sided game work. So important. Um, just to summarize what you said, though, because I think it's important, especially for developing coaches or any coach working with kids, this idea of some structure, right? Organizing
yes,
principles. You
yes,
mentioned
organizing
themes,
principles. Yeah,
and it's great as a coach to have that. But then the next piece is communication, right? How do you share
right,
those themes with the players? And then communication, and I've been doing a lot of thinking myself about this recently, is how do you talk to the players? How do you, first of all, get to know them, right, as individuals and understand
right.
where they are in their own development? And then how do you have that conversation with a player? How do you communicate to them where they are, what they've done, what's next for them, where they need to continue to develop, what are their strengths? How do you think about communication with your players?
Look, Alf, I think it's a good question, and I think not all players respond the same way. Even with kids, some kids I might be speaking to Alf, and when I'm trying to get the best out of Alf and be like, Alf, come on, I can shout at Alf,
Yeah,
and
Alf
that's
needs
very
that. He definitely needs
Alf
that.
needs that because that's how Alf responds. Whereas Tom, I know that I need to be a bit more conservative. At halftime, I need to speak to him on the side, or I need to pull him on the side whilst the session is still running to say, this is what you're doing wrong outside of the spectrum of the whole group, because he's a kid that doesn't respond to being shouted at. So you need to know your players. Are they introverts? Are they extroverts? And you need to take some
Yeah,
time.
meet them where they are, right?
Yeah, meet them where they
Meet them
are.
where they are.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Great. Biso, this has been just a fantastic conversation. I'm just thrilled to have you on the show, and I really appreciate your time. But you're not done yet. You're not done yet.
Okay,
So I have
okay,
to
no
ask. I
problem.
ask everybody this at the
No
at the
problem.
end. Would love to hear or learn about, or something you can share with our audience, a resource that is either something that you're really, you use a lot right now, or just maybe a touchstone, something that you come back to, but something you can share with other coaches that you found to be a valuable resource.
So I've got several valuable resources. Um, the first one is I'm using a book that I'm reading right now. I don't know if you can see it. It's called Developing Youth Football Players. This is a legendary book. The author unfortunately passed away. His name is Horst Vine. So it's a fantastic resource. It comes with DVDs on the small-sided games you can use for developing the young player from a young age. It's got a lot of scientific principles on small-sided games. Instead of playing 7v7, why it's important to play 3v3, then 5v5, then 7v7, then 9v9, then the full game. So it's got a systematic approach for developing players from the 3v3 scenario. Other material is used. Coerver Coaching has got over 40 years of developing young players, so it's a fantastic resource for youth development coaching. And also a fellow coach in South Africa, foreign coach, is also late now. His name is Ted Dimitri. He's got some awesome material on South African specific physiological profile of
Hmm,
players, and that's a material that I'm using. You know.
interesting. Great. Well, thank you for sharing those, and I will, of course, put all of this into the show notes so folks can get links to these resources. But thank you, Biso, for sharing those. Uh, Great conversation. I really appreciate you getting up early on a Friday morning to have the conversation with me. It's been wonderful having you on. I look forward to getting this published for folks to hear. And yeah, thanks so much for your time. It's been great.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you very much.
That was a fascinating conversation with Biso Nkosi, who just shared his journey from playing youth football in post-apartheid South Africa to an international career in coaching and teaching. A few takeaways from the conversation. He discussed the differences in youth development approaches across countries like South Africa, Spain, Japan, and Brazil, highlighting how early exposure to structured training and ball mastery gives players from certain nations competitive advantages. He explored the importance of balancing structured systems with creative expression, noting the recent emergence of dribblers in modern football. Biso also shared practical coaching advice for developing diverse youth players, including using themed training sessions and adapting communication styles to each player's personality. Throughout our conversation, Biso's cross-cultural perspective offered valuable insights into effective youth development practices around the world. If you're enjoying these conversations with great coaches, I hope you'll share this with others in your coaching network. Thanks so much for listening to the CoachCraft podcast. See you next time.